Hey everyone! So in this video, I'm going to go over the PowerPoint on revision. So we're going to go through the stages of the revision process. And some of this might be new information to you. I think a lot of times when students are asked to revise their writing or even sort of forced to by an assignment to revise, they focus mostly on very specific elements of the paper. Typically, the elements that are focused on are very small sentence level issues. I think a lot of people in general think that the word revision means looking for spelling and grammar errors. And that's actually only one small portion of the revision process. And it's also the step that should come last in the whole thing. So we're going to look at what comes before those issues of grammar and spelling and mechanics and things like that. Where are you supposed to start? And then what steps should you take through the revision process to make sure that you are submitting the best possible version of your paper as possible? All right, so let me go ahead and share the screen here. All right, so we have here revision, the rewriting process. Okay, all right, so first things first, when you are revising and editing, you want to go from global issues to local issues. Now, we're not talking about world issues. We're talking about issues in the paper. You want to start global, meaning big, and then work your way down to the local, smaller issues, okay? There are actually 4 levels to the revision process. Level 1 is the global revision, where we're dealing with big issues, big problems. Level 2 is what we call substantive editing. Level 3 is copy editing. And level 4 is proofreading, which is, as I said, where most people begin and end their revision process. We tend to skip over those first 3 levels and go straight to level 4, which is actually what we should do last. And we're going to look at each of those levels one by one so that you can see what you should be looking at and looking for in each step along the way. Okay, so level 1 is global revision. All right, so this is where we're kind of going back to the rhetorical situation, where we're thinking about almost everything that's sort of not even in the paper necessarily. It's the foundation of the paper that needs to be set in place in order for the whatever it is you write to even be successful. So we're looking at topic. Is my topic focused? Have I successfully developed my topic within the essay? And what we mean by successfully develop it, have you focused in narrow enough in order to fully explain and develop each of your main ideas? I might have used this example once before, but I had a student once writing an argumentative research paper. And when we started the assignment, his topic was the conspiracies, which I use that term loosely, around September 11th. And if you have heard anything at all about the conspiracies around 9/11 and what it really was, that it wasn't really planes, that it was this, that it was that, there's a lot. And I took one look at it and I said, you are never going to be able to fully develop this topic in a 5 to 6 page essay. Like, there's so many different elements of this big general topic that you would barely be able to even mention each one in a 5 to 6 page essay. I mean, these are ideas that people have devoted full books to, so sure, you could give me 5 pages where all you do is basically just list and summarize, each of the, theories, but what good is that? That's not really presenting an argument, and certainly not going to be able to present a convincing one. And even if you're not trying to be argumentative or persuasive in your paper, you still have to be able to fully develop each of your main ideas. And if you have one ginormous topic, you're not going to be able to do that in the page length that you're given. You're not going to be able to really develop each idea. So I said, okay, how about you list 3 or 4 of the theories that you either think are the most interesting, or aren't, maybe they're ones that not a lot of people have heard about. Just, if you were going to choose 3 or 4 of those conspiracies to focus on, which ones would you want to choose? And so he wrote down the 3 or 4. And I'm like, okay, now pick one of those. And there was a look of fear and confusion on his face. And I'm like, trust me, just pick one. You've narrowed it down to your top 3 or 4. Now, out of that list, choose the one that you want to talk about, and only one. And he did. And he ended up with a really successful paper, because by focusing on one element of that overall topic, he was able to really get into all of the ideas, the main points, to explain that theory. And it worked really well. That's what we mean by making sure your topic is focused, so that then you can successfully develop it in the paragraphs, right? What about your angle? Have you said something new about your topic, or are you presenting a unique point of view? And that's especially difficult to achieve when you're doing just a standard research paper. But this is where you have the opportunity to say, okay, the topic I've chosen, there are, I've come across in my research at least 6 or 7 main ideas that could be discussed on this topic. I know I can't look at all of those, so I'm going to focus my topic, and I'm going to choose 3 of them. Well, in choosing your main ideas to focus on, you have a way of presenting a unique angle, because maybe you're going to choose the main points that aren't discussed as much in the research. Or maybe you're going to combine them in a way that is different than what most of the research is showing out there. But in some way, you want to make sure that you are presenting something that is not just a regurgitation of what's already out there. This is why it's so important to make sure that a significant percentage of your paper is 100% your own ideas and words, because that is how you make sure that your angle, that your unique perspective is coming through in the essay. Is your purpose clear? Is it clear why you've chosen the topic and why you have developed it the way you have? Is it clear what you want your readers to take away from the essay? And again, I'm not the only reader. You have to think bigger than that, even if it's hypothetical. But is it, is it clear what the whole point of the essay is? Who are your readers? I just said I'm not the only one. You have to envision that this paper is something that many other people will read, even just your classmates. That will give you more to work with than just thinking of me as your only reader or any other instructor for other classes. You want to imagine that at the very least, your classmates might read your paper. Even though most of the time they actually won't. You want to write it as if it's for them. You might even, depending on your topic, you might even have a bigger hypothetical audience in mind. Maybe it's anyone in the nursing field. Maybe it's anyone in healthcare in general. So you have to think about who your theoretical readers are. Speak to them on their level. Anticipate their needs, the information, the background information they're going to need, explanations that they're going to need, questions they might have, so that you can go ahead and anticipate those questions and address them in the essay. All right, so just at the, again, at the very least, pretend like your classmates, all of your classmates, are going to be reading your paper. And then the context. Have you connected your topic to the real world in some way? I'm sure all of you are, given the topics you have to choose from. But more importantly, is your tone appropriate, right? So you don't want to be super formal and academic and stuffy and sound almost like, an academic robot, but you can't be too informal either, right? You have to find that perfect balance. You want it to be professional, but approachable. Okay? If you have answered no to any of these questions here, if you don't think your topic's focused, if you're not sure about your angle, sorry, an alarm. If you're not, if your purpose isn't coming through, if you haven't really considered your readers, if you're not sure about the tone you're using, that sort of thing, if you've answered no to any of these, then you might have a little bit of work to do before you even move to the next level of revision. If you thought about these things prior to writing the essay, then hopefully you have answered yes to at least most of them. And that, hopefully the foundation of your paper is solid already. But if it's not, then it's going to crumble before you really even got started on it. Because if the foundation isn't solid, nothing's going to stand on it. And you might have some of the best ideas. You may have found all kinds of good research. But if the foundation isn't there, none of that stuff is going to matter. If I can't tell, if your topic is all over the place, if it's too broad, that's a problem. If I can't tell why you're writing the paper, if I can't tell what your overall point is, the whole reason that you're writing it and what you're trying to accomplish with it, then none of the rest matters. So please take these things into consideration first. Right? Then we move though to level 2. Once your foundation is set, we're going to move to level 2, which is substantive editing. All right? We're going to look at content, organization, and design. So, content. Do you have a clear and concise thesis statement? You know, for example, if you are looking at art therapy, right? Does your thesis statement make it clear which elements of art therapy your essay is going to focus on? If you're looking at causes of nursing burnout, does your thesis statement clearly tell us which specific causes you're going to look at in your essay? You need a solid thesis statement. It is typically the last sentence of your introductory paragraph. It needs to be a single sentence that is crystal clear in terms of not only the focused topic of your essay, but also the main points of your essay. Let your reader know by the end of that introductory paragraph exactly what they can expect in the rest of the essay. Following up on that thesis statement, are your main points clear? Right? So if you're looking at 3 specific, if you listed 3 causes of nursing burnout in your thesis statement, does the essay clearly look at those 3 causes? There shouldn't be a 4th cause thrown in there somewhere if it's not listed in the thesis statement. There shouldn't be anything listed in the thesis statement unless it's also in the essay. So you have to make sure that, your main points are clear and that matches up with the thesis statement. You have to make sure that each of those main points has specific and adequate support. You need to fully develop each main point. That might take multiple paragraphs. So, for instance, your first cause of nursing burnout, whatever the first cause is that you're deciding to discuss, that cause might take you 3 or 4 paragraphs to fully develop and explain. Don't think that one main point equals one single paragraph. We are well beyond that level at this point, right? This is a college level course, and the development of ideas should reflect that. Does the essay have a concluding paragraph? Or maybe 2, and again, conclusion might take 2 paragraphs, typically just 1, but is it there? Does it have a conclusion that does what a conclusion is supposed to do? All of those ideas there under that content, we reviewed them in the first couple weeks of the course. So there are lessons back there towards the beginning on thesis statements, introductory paragraphs, body paragraphs, concluding paragraphs. So if you need a refresher on that, you can go back to those lessons in the first couple weeks. The next part of substantive editing is your organization. So, you have the main points. Does it match up with your thesis statement, like I said, and in the same order? So in your thesis statement, you said you were going to discuss these 3 specific causes of nursing burnout, and you listed them in a specific order. You have to discuss them in the same order in the body of the essay. That order is totally up to you, but it needs to match up. But you have to think about, how should I order them? It should not be a random list that then you just follow that order in the paragraphs. The order should have some meaning and logic to it. We're going to look a little bit at that more here in just a few minutes. But is the organization logical? And then the design elements. This is where APA format comes into play. Do you have 1-inch margins on all 4 sides of the document? Do you have the correct spacing? Do you have the correct font? Is it in proper APA format? Do you have the title page correct? Do you have your page numbers in the top right corner of the header? All of those things that we talked about, I believe it was either week 3 or 4, talking about APA format. Maybe week 5. Maybe week 4. Do you have proper citations and a proper references page, right? So again, before you even move into the other 2 levels, make sure that this element of the substantive editing level is good to go. Remember all of the rules for reference pages and how the citations work in conjunction with the reference entries. Check that. All right, then we move on to looking at, when we're looking at the content there in substantive editing, what we have included, do you know for sure if you have everything you need in terms of content? Do you need to add anything, or do you need to take anything out? One way we can do that is by outlining. Now, sometimes we use an outline in the beginning of our writing process. Before we start writing the rough draft, we will create an outline so that we have a visual reminder of what we wanted to discuss in each part of the essay. Hopefully, if you used that outline, it translated successfully in the actual essay that you drafted. But maybe you didn't use an outline, or maybe you did, but still, this is, writing's not easy. And even if we have a visual outline, sometimes, our minds, don't always cooperate with us. And what comes out on the page might not necessarily match up with the plan we had in the beginning. So one way to double check that your organization and your content are good to go is through what we sometimes call reverse outlining. Okay, and so this is basically where, you had your original outline to help you write the draft. Now you have the draft and you're going to create a different outline based on what's actually there in the draft. Not what you envisioned, not what you planned originally, but what actually ended up on the page. So that way you can look at the main ideas in the main ideas you actually discuss in the paper and the order that you actually discussed them in, with the support for each one that actually ended up in the essay. And you can look at the skeleton of the essay and decide if everything matches up with your original plan. Or if maybe even your original plan had some flaws and now you can see it now that you've done the reverse outlining. But it's basically just a way to say, okay, here's a streamlined visual representation of what I've actually done in the essay. And I can then look at that outline, look at that skeleton, and it's a little easier to see if something got left out, if something made it in that shouldn't have, if things are out of order, right? So reverse outline. So you're gonna take a sheet of paper, or I guess you could type it, And you're going to write your thesis statement at the top. Not the one you had on your original outline, not the one you're thinking of in your head, but the one that actually ended up on the page. Write it down. Then you're going to look at each body paragraph of the essay and put the topic sentence of each paragraph as separate points under the thesis statement. Remember, topic sentence, first sentence of the paragraph. If you are still unsure of topic sentences, I highly suggest you go back to the lesson on body paragraphs. I believe it's in week 2. And then come to me if you're still uncertain of how they function, how to create them, that sort of thing, because they are such an important part of making sure your reader follows your train of thought in the essay, making sure that the reader doesn't get lost in the essay, that they fully understand why you're going from one idea to the next, how it all fits together and progresses. Topic sentences are crucial. So please review that lesson and come to me with any questions if you're still not certain about topic sentences. But that's what you're going to do for the outline though. Thesis statement at the top, and then go through every single body paragraph and write the topic sentence down, right? You want to make sure that the idea in every topic sentence you wrote down relates to your thesis in some way. Right? So, for instance, if those causes of nursing burnout, let's say after your introductory paragraph and thesis statement, the next 4 paragraphs cover the first cause that you listed. Do the topic sentences for those 4 paragraphs clearly relate to that cause? And did you also relate it back to your thesis statement? You want to make sure that there is, again, coherence from one paragraph to the next. And if there are issues with the topic sentences, now's your chance to fix them. If it turns out that one particular topic sentence for your first main point, like I said, you have 4 paragraphs for that first cause that you're discussing. Maybe one of those topic sentences didn't actually tell us the focus of that paragraph. Maybe it didn't contain a transition to let us know why we're moving on to a new paragraph within this cause. Now's your chance to fix it. You do that for every paragraph, right? This slide, we actually have a little example of an outline done in this fashion. Now, this is for a literary analysis essay, but it's the one that is used as an example in your book. So I used it here, but even though it's not the same type of paper that you're writing, the process is still the same, okay? So we have our thesis statement up here as point 1, right? We put it at the top. Eveline refuses to leave Frank because she fears failure. Leave with Frank because she fears failure. So in this story, there's a girl who mother died, and on her mother's deathbed, she made Eveline promise that basically she would stay with the family and take care of things, and especially, make sure her dad was okay, blah, blah, blah. And Eveline had every intention of keeping that promise, and she has up until the point of this story. Her father, though, is not such a nice guy. Eveline is really, she's not very happy. And she meets this guy, Frank, who's willing to just it's crazy because immediately upon meeting each other, it's love at first sight. And he promises to basically whisk her away from her unhappy life and leave the country and go live this exciting, adventurous life together. And so the story, it's a short story, is her conflict, her battle of, does she fulfill the promise she made to her mother, which she takes very seriously? Or is it time for her to be happy and live life for herself? That, and in the end, she doesn't go. She stays. And so the story is really like, why on earth would she stay? So that's what this essay was about, is exploring why Eveline stays. And in this particular essay, the author, their claim, their thesis says Eveline refuses to leave with Frank because she fears failure. Right? The first main point, first topic sentence of the first body paragraph was her deathbed promise to her mother was unfair. And then she has good reason to want to leave her father. Her home life is so unhealthy, she should leave. So if these three things are true, then the only option left is that her only reason for staying is that she's afraid. So she retreats into the familiar to avoid risk. And that's the conclusion of the essay. Right? So points 2, 3, 4, and 5 represent the main ideas in the essay, the main points, if you will. Right? In this case, the author's main points, the topic sentences, seem to relate directly to the thesis statement, right? This thesis statement could actually be more focused to let us know that they're actually going to look at the reasons why she should have left first, and then get into the reasons why she stayed. But that, that's fine. At least right now, these main ideas do directly relate to the thesis that the author's trying to prove or express. So the next step then is going back to each of those main points and then adding the supporting details that you're using in each main point. Again, this is just a list. Like, for cause 1, what was the first idea that I had about this first cause? Did I use a source? What source was it? What did the source say? What did I say to follow up on it? But again, it's just real brief phrases and words. You're not necessarily having to type out sentences, right? Now, the idea is, after you've added in the supporting details underneath each main point, is to make sure that the supporting details are set, that they're good to go. You want to make sure that the supporting details under a topic sentence directly relate to that topic sentence. You want to make sure that none of your points repeat an idea that is already somewhere else, unless you're repeating for emphasis. Sometimes that happens. But you want to eliminate any careless repetition. Like if you talk about an idea twice, does it really need to be discussed in both places, or should it really have only just been discussed in one of those spots? Right? Decide whether your support is adequate. Have you, included the most convincing details? Have you provided your own ideas? Have you, if you used a source in that section, have you used the best source material possible, the most effective material? Have you followed up on the source material to explain it and explain how it connects to the topic sentence or that main point? Right? So if you decide that things need to be rearranged, if you decide that you don't have enough support in a given paragraph or in a given point, you need to rethink that point in order to expand on it. How can you develop that point further and add more support to it? It might be that you can't, and maybe it doesn't need to be there to begin with. It's okay to take things out. A lot of people think that once it's there, it can't be removed, it's set in stone, but it's not. It's okay to take things out, especially if it's not an essential component of that main point. Or sometimes you can combine material. It's like I have this small paragraph here, and a small paragraph here, and it's not like I can really expand on either one anymore. But is there a way for me to combine them in some way? And that can work sometimes. You might have to change the topic sentence then, because you had a topic sentence for this small paragraph and a topic sentence for this small paragraph. If you're going to combine those ideas, you're going to need a new topic sentence now, right? All right, let's take a look at another, the sample outline again. So here, before we went up and down, this time we're going across. So here was our first point on the outline, our thesis. And then point number 2 is our first body paragraph, our first main point. This is our second main point, our third main point, our fourth main point, and then our conclusion, right? So what was our thesis statement again? Evelyn refuses to leave with Frank because she fears failure. We don't need to develop that point on the outline any further because it's our thesis statement. The whole rest of the outline is there to support the thesis statement. Our first main point to try to prove our thesis was that her deathbed promise to her mother was unfair. The support that we have to back up this main point is that it was unfair to ask Evelyn to give up her own life. Our next main point was that Evelyn has good reason to want to leave her father. The supporting details that we included for that main point are that he's a drunk and takes advantage of the promise that Evelyn made to her mother. Like, he guilts her, he uses it against her. He's stingy. He abuses her verbally. He's a bully. Might actually beat her. And he was sometimes fun in the past, and she remembers how he used to play at picnics. Our next main point, why she should have left, was that her home life is so unhealthy, she should leave. The supporting ideas, the supporting details that we're using for this main point is that she doesn't feel a part of everything. And then there's this deal with a picture of a priest that's in the story. There's dust all over the house. There's dirtiness. It's, her life is just in squalor. So details from the story there. She thinks of leaving and remembers her dreary job. Like, she doesn't like her job either. So those are all reasons why her home life is unhealthy. Our next main point is that, given all these reasons why she should leave, the only explanation for why she stays is that, she's afraid. And what are our supporting details for that idea? Well, that leaving the familiar could mean failure. There's a quotation from the story. It says that she's about to explore this whole little section, and it suggests how uncertain she is. And life is hard, so she thinks of good memories to convince herself to stay. Our concluding idea was that she retreats into the familiar to avoid the risk. She feels she has a right to happiness. She decides a predictable life is better than one without direction and pattern. So it's almost like, even though you're miserable, the unknown, the uncertainty is almost worse. Our whole point in doing this, though, remember, we decided in the previous step that we have a solid thesis, each of our main points is good, and now we came back and added in our supporting details for each main idea. We have to look at these supporting details and decide if they're good enough. Does each main point contain enough supporting details? Does any main point need more supporting details, need to be developed more? Are there any main points where I've listed supporting details that really don't make sense in that particular part of the essay? And if they don't make sense there, would they make sense somewhere else? Or do I just need to get rid of it completely? So let's take a look here at I'm going to kind of be going back and forth between those slides. So our thesis statement was good. Our first body paragraph, remember, was about, her deathbed promise to her mother was unfair. And we had one supporting detail for that main point, that it was unfair to ask Eveline to give up her own life. So what does our analysis tell us? Well, that main point needs more support about why the promise to her dying mother was unfair to Eveline. If this is one of our main points as to why she should have left, we have to explain why it was unfair. It needs more support. So we got to figure out how to add to that paragraph or that main point. Remember, our next main point here is that she has good reason to want to leave her father. We said he's drunk, takes advantage of the promise that she made to her mother. He's stingy. He abuses her verbally. He's a bully and might actually beat her physically. And then he was sometimes fun in the past and played at picnics. So when we analyze that main point, everything up until the last supporting detail is fine. But that last supporting detail about how her father was fun in the past does not relate to that topic sentence. Because the paragraph focuses on why she would want to leave her father. So talking about how he was sometimes fun in the past doesn't belong in that paragraph. The only thing that this main point should focus on are the reasons why she should want to leave him. So we have to look there about how he was sometimes fun in the past and played at picnics. Does that even belong anywhere in the essay? Is there another main point where it would make sense to talk about how he used to be fun? You could maybe talk about it in the conclusion, because if we're talking about how she's retreating into the familiar, you could make a case that she's glossing over all of these negative traits about her father and focusing on, some of these very small positives so that she can convince herself to stay in this familiar environment. Maybe. You'd probably be fine just to totally get rid of this supporting detail completely. No matter what you decide, though, it doesn't belong here in this main point. Our next main point is how her home life is so unhealthy she should leave. The supporting details we use is that she doesn't feel part of everything. And then we're going to explain why the picture of the priest is important. We're going to talk about how, her life is squalor. We're going to look at the dust in the house, all the dirtiness around her. And we're going to talk about how she doesn't even like her job. So, the last point about the job doesn't seem to fit. Because this paragraph or this main point is supposed to be focusing on her home life, why her home life is so unhealthy that she should leave. And thinking about her job doesn't really fit here, right? Again, this might relate to something about why she should leave, another reason why she should go ahead and go with Frank. But if it doesn't fit with any of the main reasons we're choosing to discuss, then it doesn't belong in the essay at all. So again, this is one of those things where if you can see where it could fit somewhere else, go ahead and move it. But don't feel like you have to fit it in somewhere else. You can just get rid of it. But again, doesn't belong in this section. Doesn't match up with what this section is supposed to be focusing on. Oh, go back. Our last main point is that her only reason for staying is that she's afraid. The supporting details we're including is that leaving the unfamiliar could mean failure. We have this quote about to explore and that it suggests uncertainty. And we also have a supporting detail about life is hard, so she thinks of good memories to convince herself to stay. All right. So the last point in that paragraph is, about Eveline's good memories, how it could be that her dad being fun in the past, maybe that could fit over here, right? Where we're talking about how she's thinking of good memories to convince herself to stay. So that one might fit over here, that supporting detail. Up to you. Our concluding thought, she retreats into the familiar to avoid risk. She feels she has a right to happiness, but decides a predictable life is better than one without direction and pattern. Those are our supporting ideas for our conclusion. All right. This first point, though, about her right to happiness, it doesn't relate to the topic sentence, which is the concluding thought here is that she's retreating into the familiar to avoid risk. So why are we even talking about how she feels that she has a right to happiness? Right? But it could be that this whole notion of how Eveline feels like she has a right to be happy could get moved over here to this section about how her deathbed promise to her mother was unfair. What's one reason it was unfair? Because Eveline has a right to happiness. So this is another case where you could find another home for that supporting idea. If you feel it's important to talk about how Eveline has a right to be happy, then you could move it to a section where it would be more appropriate to include it. Right? So that is how you use a reverse outline to make sure that your essay is solid in terms of organization and in terms of supporting ideas. Okay? It's a really useful tool. Takes a little bit to get used to, but even if you do something just like what we did here in the PowerPoint, it's useful, right? It really helps you see the essay in a more streamlined form, because going through paragraph after paragraph, one after another in essay form, you can, even though you wrote it, you can still get lost in it. And along the way, you're still envisioning what your original intent was, and you might be reading it in a way that sounds good to you because you knew what you were trying to say in the first place. But if you use this reverse outline, there's no hiding behind anything. There's no pretending like it all makes sense and flows the right way. If you are it's almost like taking a more analytical approach to what you've actually presented in the essay. If you're doing the reverse outline, it just is what it is. And then you have to look at it and be accountable for what is actually showing up on the outline. And if things don't make sense where they show up on the outline, then that means they don't make sense where they show up in the paragraphs, and you have to change things around. And again, maybe you'll just need to shift some things around. Maybe you'll have to just get rid of things entirely. But if it's showing up on the outline as something that doesn't seem right, then that's a problem. You have to address it. But the outline's a nice visual way to do so. Okay. All right. Looking at that outline, you might decide, I'm not sure I like the order of my main ideas, right? So thinking about rearranging things, that's a pretty important step of the revision process too, especially here in substantive editing. You want to give a lot of thought to the order of your paragraphs and the order of your supporting details within each paragraph. Because the order that they came to you as you were creating your outline or doing your rough draft might not necessarily be the best order. So you want to play around with the order of your main points. You can even cut and paste the paragraphs and sentences and save different versions, and read through each one and see which order you think sounds the best. But you want to think mostly about logic and emphasis when you are deciding what order to discuss your main points and what order to discuss your supporting ideas within each main point. Ask yourself these questions. Should I arrange my points along a scale of value, power, weight, forcefulness? And what we mean by that is, do you want to arrange your main ideas from negative to positive, or from most influential, the most important, to the least important, or the opposite, the least impressive to the most impressive? General to specific. One thing I will say here, if your main points are connected in some way, like here's one cause of nursing burnout, and the things that I'm discussing here about this first cause, some of them feed into another cause of nursing burnout. Well, then I probably want to discuss that other cause next, since there's a connection there. Also keep in mind that humans tend to remember best what we read or see or hear last. Sometimes we will remember what was in the beginning. If it was impactful, we'll remember the beginning. The middle is where things get very hazy for us, and it's just human nature. So we typically organize our main points from the least impressive to the most impressive. So you always typically want to end with a bang, if you will. The main point that will have the biggest impact on the reader. Maybe the one that you think is the most important. Maybe the one that is the most surprising. I don't know. But think about the most logical way to order your main points. And then kind of use that same process for examining the order of your supporting details in each main point. All right? Because again, the order that they come to you as you're writing, the order they come to you in your head, isn't necessarily the most effective. It's good to get them there. Well, at least they're there. That's what a draft is for. All right? Now we're in the revision, though, and we're going to make sure that everything is ordered in the best way possible. Okay? All right. You also want to check for coherence in this substantive editing phase. I think this is a big phase. There's a lot going on in this level. And what we're talking about here, does it flow? We're talking about coherence. Is it ordered logically, but also does everything flow, right? Have you guided us from one idea to the next? Read it out loud. That is one way to check for coherence. Maybe record yourself reading it, whether audio or video. Have a friend read it. Have a classmate read it. Listen for choppiness or abruptness, meaning things got cut off, or all of a sudden, we were talking about one thing and all of a sudden we start talking about something else. Like there was no transition into the next idea, right? Look and listen for those clues. You want everything arranged in a way that's easy to follow. You want to make sure that each paragraph flows from one to the next. We already talked about topic sentences, but don't forget that topic sentences typically need to include a transition of some sort, right? So, if you're moving from one main point to the next, you know, let's say the first cause of nursing burnout that you looked at was, um, you know, long shifts. And the second one you're going to look at is um, understaffing, right? So when you move into that section on understaffing, you need not only a topic sentence that lets us know that this new section is about understaffing and how it relates to burnout, how it causes burnout, but you want to transition us in it, guide us into it, remind us where we just came from. So in addition to working long shifts, nurses also experience burnout um, because of staffing issues, right? Transitions. Repetition of key terms, repetition of parallel structure, those are all things that can help create coherence as well. Parallel structure is when I say something like, this is a very small example. If I say something like, you know, last weekend I went jogging, swimming, and on a hike. Can you understand the information that I'm trying to express? Yes. Does it sound right? No. Is it pleasing to the ear? No. Because I messed up the structure. If I have, I say jogging and swimming, if I have jogging, swimming, I don't want the next part to say, and on a hike. I want it to say jogging, swimming, and hiking, right? So parallel structure. That can be on a word level, it could be phrases, it could be on a sentence level, a whole sentence, parallel structure among sentences. But it's almost like creating a rhythm, creating a pattern, and it helps keep the reader engaged, right? So it helps the paper flow, helps your ideas connect and flow. So as you are trying to move out of the substantive editing level, here's a little revision checklist for you. Is my thesis statement intelligent and clearly stated? Is my argument logically and effectively organized? Does the main idea of every paragraph relate directly to my thesis statement in some way? Obviously, if you have a main point, like that first cause of nursing burnout you're going to discuss, if it takes you 4 paragraphs to fully develop that one first cause, do your topic sentences, or do the main idea of all 4 paragraphs directly relate to that one cause, which then directly relates back to your thesis statement, right? Are the paragraphs fully developed with plenty of specific examples, illustrations, source material? Have you done enough to develop the main idea of each paragraph to support that topic sentence for that paragraph? Do the ideas flow coherently? Are the transitions easy to follow? Is it easy to figure out why you're going from one idea to the next? And have you accomplished your purpose? Does the paper make the point that you set out to make? Is it doing what you wanted it to do when it's all said and done? If your checklist is good to go, we can move on. Level 3, copy editing. So we're going to look at your title page. We're going to look at your headings, if applicable, if you have them. We're going to look and make sure that you have concise paragraphs. This is where we're getting into making sure you're not being too wordy, right? We've already checked to make sure that they belong in the paragraph, that they belong in the essay, that you have a topic sentence, that you have the supporting details, everything's ordered logically. Now we want to make sure that they're concise, that we haven't gotten too wordy. Are they consistent in that respect? How can we improve upon our sentences? Now, these aren't looking for errors. This isn't looking for grammar and spelling errors. This is literally just how can I improve on the style of my sentences. And then refining our use of language. So combining for conciseness, right? So basically what we're talking here is sentence combining, okay? There was a lesson on this in week 6, right? Go back and review that lesson if you're not quite sure about this business right here, right? Sentence combining is a great way of making sure that your writing stays at a certain level academically and professionally, and that it doesn't get too choppy and boring and repetitive, that it doesn't sound too monotonous. It makes it more engaging. All right. Rearranging for emphasis and variety, right? So these are all ways that you can sort of mix up the structure of your sentences to either emphasize a main idea or just create variety. You can vary the pattern. You know, our typical way of arranging a sentence is subject, verb, you know, and either like a direct object, preposition, whatever. But you can depart from that pattern. The subject does not always have to come first. You know, you can use things like dashes. You can use an interrupting phrase set off by dashes or commas. You can put a modifier at the beginning of the sentence. You can have, you know, most of your sentences be longer, complex, and then boom, you put in a short sentence to create an effect and emphasize something, right? So plagiarizing, which means borrowing the words or ideas of another writer without giving proper credit, is a serious infraction. Do not do it, right? That short little sentence there is a break from the norm, a break from the expectations. It draws our attention to it. It emphasizes the idea, right? You can have deliberate repetition as well. Twain believed that organized religion was a folly to be ridiculed discreetly. Or one cannot talk well, study well, or write well if one cannot think well. So purposeful repetition of the word folly here, purposeful repetition of the structure, you know, and it ends up being one word as well. So talk well, study well, write well, think well. So there are all kinds of ways that you can add some variety to your sentence structure so that the writing is a little more interesting. Think about individual words. Check your verbs, right? Try to use lively verbs. Use active voice, not passive voice. So passive voice is saying, John was bit by the dog. John was bit by the dog. 6 words. Who is the subject of that sentence? Most people will say John, right? Okay, so what's the verb? What did John do? He was bitten. So really, John didn't actually do anything. Something was done to him. So why did we express it that way? When we're looking at that sentence and we realize, okay, John seems to be the subject, but what did he do? What's the verb associated with him? Well, it was bitten. Was bitten. That means he didn't actually do anything. So what's the person or thing in the sentence that actually did something? Well, it's the dog. So why not just say the dog bit John, right? It's much more direct and to the point. It allows your writing to be less wordy because we're not having to create prepositional phrases and things. You want to make sure that it's clear who or what is doing the action. You can still change your sentence structure, but don't change the sentence structure just for the sake of it, especially if it's going to put the writing in passive voice. You want to think about word choice in terms of connotation and denotation as well. And what we mean by that is denotation is like the dictionary definition of a word. Connotation, though, is like what we associate with the word, right? So saying something like using the word snake. Obviously, the denotation for that word is, a reptile, blah, 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 But what do we often associate snakes with? Danger. If we're looking more of like a religious or biblical slant on it, sin, right? Satan. And there's so much of the English language, especially, has words and phrases that literally mean one thing, but culturally, we have attached other ideas and feelings to that word. And you need to be aware of that to make sure that you aren't accidentally implying something by using a word that has specific associations with it, or maybe doing it on purpose for an effect, right? So just keep that in mind. Make sure your tone is set in your very first paragraph, your introductory paragraph, and stick with that tone. Again, you don't want it to be too casual and too informal, but you don't want to sound like a robot with no personality either. Use formal language. This is a college level research paper. It is in APA format. You do not want to use informal conventions such as contractions. So instead of, wouldn't, would not, can't, cannot. I'm not going to be as much of a stickler for contractions being used in the writing as other instructors might, but you do need to be aware that in true APA format, you're not going to use contractions, right? I will be a stickler for slang. Try not to use slang terms unless there is a really good reason for it. Try not to use phrases or expressions that are too informal, inappropriate. Make sure that, you're not using sentence fragments because that's, because it's the way we speak sometimes. And always make sure that you are writing with a third person approach. Yes, you want your voice and tone to come through, but in APA format, very rarely are you permitted to refer to yourself in the first person. There is no I, me, my, mine. It has to be more formal than that. So instead of saying, I would think that working 4 12-hour shifts would be a good thing. Instead, you would say, one would think that working 4 12-hour shifts would be a good thing, right? Again, the only time you're really ever permitted to use personal pronouns in APA format is if you are using a personal example as support for an idea. And even then, you have to be very careful how much of yourself you're putting in there. So that's that. All right. Then we finally get to level 4, proofreading. So read your writing out loud. Read your draft backwards. Read a hard copy of your work. If you're able to print it out and look at a hard copy of it, sometimes it's easier to spot, proofreading errors in that manner as opposed to on the screen. But we're talking about grammar and spelling, right? Go back and review the lessons from week 6 if needed. All right, but here is kind of what we're looking at. Failure to proofread is like preparing a magnificent dinner and forgetting to set the table. Jessica Mitford. So you have this beautiful spread. The food is delicious. Dessert is going to just be to die for. Everything looks, smells, and tastes amazing. Your guests are so excited. Everything looks so good on the surface. And then you sit down to dig in, and you can't. You can't even get to the good stuff. And if you try, it's probably going to get messy because there's nothing to eat with. Proofreading, having too many sentence level errors is exactly the same way. Careless mistakes, look for those. Make sure you're not using incorrect words or homonyms. So the example here is homonyms, like there, and there. Make sure you're using the correct one. When it comes to, how would I ever end up using an incorrect word? Like just a word that's just flat out wrong. Well, it could be a typo, right? It could be that it's an expression that we think we know, but we don't. A good one is something like, I don't care whether or not you want to go to bed. It's time to go to bed. A lot of times what we'll see students write is, I don't care rather you want to go to bed or not. So rather it's this or that, it's whether. So that is an example of how you might use a word incorrectly. Look for those. Spelling. Spell check is a great thing. It will most likely catch spelling errors. But you have to go in and fix them. It'll point them out for you, but you have to actually go and fix it. And again, making sure that you don't have wrong words because you spelled a word wrong, but it ended up being a real word, just the wrong word. So spell check's not going to check that. And then, of course, the grammar and mechanics that we covered last week. Sentence fragments, run-on sentences, and comma splices. Comma splices are the most common error in student writing, followed closely by sentence fragments. Standard run-ons, traditional run-on sentences, they actually aren't as common as the other two. But comma splices, remember, that's just a special type of run-on sentence where we're trying to use a comma by itself to connect two complete sentences. You can't do that. Comma's not strong enough by itself. Go back and review that lesson if that does not sound familiar to you, because, again, it's the most common error. But sentence fragments as well, okay? Make sure you don't have faulty modifiers. Make sure you don't have misplaced modifiers or dangling modifiers. That was discussed in week 6 as well. Try to do these things on your own, but certainly feel free to enlist the assistance of someone else, especially with these proofreading errors. Sometimes they are hard to find, but that's why reading the draft out loud can help you pick up on them, and reading it backwards, right? Because if you're reading it in order, your mind is automatically going to correct errors. But if you read it backwards and everything's like out of place, then it's easier for your brain to spot the problems, right? But get help on it. Ask for some assistance with the proofreading, especially. One other part of revision that you may or may not have participated in the past is a peer review. Most students hate peer reviews, probably because they've never really had a successful one for various reasons. You're going to be doing one in this class. It's an assignment. And some pointers for this, for you, the author. If you're given an opportunity to do a peer review, specify the kind of help you want. Let them know what you're worried about, what you would like them specifically to look at. I mean, they're going to look at the whole thing, but can you kind of keep an eye on this specifically as you read it? Ask the reader productive questions about your essay, not just yes or no answers. What about this paragraph here? Do you think what supporting details work well? What do you think I need to add to it? Do I need to, be specific with the questions that you're wanting them to answer. Encourage them to be honest, but don't get defensive, right? We're all here to do better. Nobody's perfect, right? Now, if they come at you sideways, then, still try not to get defensive, but, then that's a different situation entirely. But if they're coming at you with true intentions and constructive criticism and productive feedback, don't get defensive. You're honestly trying to help. But ultimately, make your own decisions about your paper. In a peer review, it is just a peer's feedback. You are not obligated to take their advice. Consider their advice and their suggestions, but you are not obligated to implement them, right? When you are doing a peer review as the reader, you're the one reading and giving feedback. Don't feel like you can't be helpful. That is one of the #1 reasons why students don't like peer reviews, because they think to themselves, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. How could I possibly help someone else? Or, I don't trust that any of my classmates know what they're doing. How could they possibly help me? Okay, shut that down right now. A peer review is not a grade. You are not giving a grade to this person. The other person is not giving you a grade. That's the instructor's job. That's my job. Okay? This is just feedback, right? These are just suggestions. You all know the assignment's requirements, okay? If it's a peer review, that person is in class with you. They know what you were supposed to do because they're doing the same thing in their paper. Maybe a different topic, but still. Everyone knows the requirements of the assignment. As a reader, you know when you understand what you're reading or when something is confusing, right? You may not feel like you are a great writer. You may have struggled writing your own research paper, but darn it, you can read something and know when it's good. You can read something and know when it's confusing. You know when something isn't explained well enough. You know when someone says that they're going to discuss this idea and then they don't really explain it. You know how to see that, how to identify that. You know when something isn't convincing. Even if you feel like your writing skills are not as strong as other students, you do know how to tell if what you're reading is good or if it needs work. So doing a peer review is not about being a good writer. It is about being a good reader. And you've had much more practice at that than you have at being a writer of research papers. You do know how to tell if what you're reading is good or needs work. And the best example I can give is this. None of us here are filmmakers, but we know when a movie could have been better. We might not necessarily know how to make it better, or like the steps that you would take, the technical elements. But we can look at a movie and say, this part was really confusing. This part was really boring. The ending, there was no ending. Movie was just done. You know, I felt very unsatisfied. It didn't, we all know how to do that. Now it's up to the filmmaker, the writer, the director, the producers to decide if they're going to change anything and how, but we at least have the knowledge and experience to say, there's something not right here. This needs worked on. Have confidence in yourself as a reader. Okay? Peer reviews are a two-way street. When you give your paper to someone else for them to peer review it, there is a real possibility that you are going to get helpful feedback from them. If you give your your paper to someone to peer review and they don't really give you much, maybe you've given them something. Maybe you've given them a good example that they can aspire to. Maybe by reading your essay, they're like, oh, wow, look at this introduction. This is great. Wow, that's a really solid thesis statement. These topic sentences are great. It's a learning experience for them, right? So please think of it that way. Ultimately, I'm going to read your essay as well. I'm going to give you feedback on it too. If you get good feedback from your peer, great. If you don't, maybe you gave them something instead. But we're all capable of this. And the good news, especially for this paper, is when you do the peer review assignment, you are going to have a very specific list of questions to guide you through the peer review. So when you're looking at your peer's paper, your classmate's paper, you're going to look at the peer review sheet and it's going to say, look at the introductory paragraph and how does it grab your attention? And then you look at the introductory paragraph. How does it grab your attention? Look at the introductory paragraph and find the thesis statement. Copy and paste the thesis statement here. There's the thesis statement, right? So it's a very structured process. It is not just going to be you getting a classmate's paper and being told, all right, have at it, read it, go through it, give them feedback. No. You will have very specific instructions to follow. It's very structured. But again, we can all help each other. Ultimately, my feedback will probably carry the most weight because I am the instructor and I am the one who's probably the most experienced with writing essays. I do say probably. There might be others in the class who have more experience than me. But we're going to assume that my feedback is probably weighted greater than the feedback from your peer. But going through that process helps both of you. When you're going through that structured peer review, looking at your classmate's paper, you are having to focus on all the elements that are supposed to be in your paper also. So by doing the peer review on their paper, it might actually help you start to recognize things you need to work on your paper before you even get the peer review back from your other classmate, before you even get feedback from me. So use it just as a tool and know that everyone is capable of benefiting from it. But at the end of the day, you'll also be getting my feedback on your draft. And it's your paper. You decide what revisions to make. Right? Okay, so Again, when you get to the point where you're revising, after you get the peer review back, after you get my feedback on your draft, you're going to come back and go through those 4 stages: global revision, substantive editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Okay? All right, so that, I think, covers it for this. If you have any questions about revision in general, let me know. If you have questions about the peer review, hold off on that because when you get to the assignment, there's a video in the instructions that explains exactly what you need to do and how that's all going to work. So hold off on those questions until you've at least watched the video and seen what you're supposed to do. If you have questions about revision in general, those 4 levels that we just talked about, reverse outlining, things like that, grammar and mechanics, anything having to do with the revision process, let me know. Otherwise, you guys are free to move on to the next thing.